Ralph Mateja, you've raised some very interesting points here, and we continue this discussion right after this short break. Welcome back. We continue unpacking President Jacob Zuma's unexpected appointment of a new finance minister. Joined in studio by Rand Daily Mail editor Ray Hartley, political analyst Ralph Mateja, and our own eNCA commentator Angelo Fick. And Ray, I'm going to pick up the discussion with you because Ralph made a very pointed comment before the break about this not being government policy, the kind of wasteful expenditure, irregular expenditure that we've seen. We know that government policy right now is austerity. Are we saying that this comes down to the whim of one person?
I think it does. I mean, the president appoints at his pleasure and disappoints, I suppose you could say, at his pleasure. But, you know, it's his decision and he doesn't have to explain it. But, you know, what drove that decision and why now, I think remains the mystery. And some of these things that have been mentioned, I think, are absolutely spot on. And you know, the nuclear deal, for example, I've written about that. I've spoken to people in the Treasury about it, and they've all basically shrugged and said, we have no idea. We don't know. There's no formal request for costing. There hasn't been an effort made to involve us in any of these discussions, to actually take us along to give an opinion on what this might end up costing the fiscus, which is extraordinary because it'll be the single biggest mega structure deal ever concluded in the country, maybe north of R1 trillion. And the Treasury, I think, you know, will apply the same rules that it always has applied, which is, well, what's the plan? Is it sustainable? Are there other options that could be pursued that are more viable? And I don't think Zuma wants that. You know, he wants this nuclear thing to happen.
Why do you think that is? Why is it so important that this is the direction in which South Africa heads from an energy point of view?
Well, I think that it's a belief in the state undertaking major projects, the state being at the center of the economy, the driver of growth, and that it needs to be seen to be building very big infrastructure projects, rolling them out. That's how the economy is going to be unlocked and employment's going to be created at an ideological level. And then I think beyond that, I think there are a lot of people, who are frankly salivating at the prospect of north of R1 trillion being spent, because they might get 1% of that. That's $1 billion. You know, so that really is the sad prospect that we're looking at.
Angelo, we've also had the issue of the presidential jet come up, and we know that you know, Kevin Wakefield and the various other stakeholders in that were very, very adamant about the fact that an inquiry is merely being made at this point, and nothing else is happening, and nothing untoward will happen in this deal. They'll make very sure of that. I mean, how influential is that perhaps in this whole affair?
Well, I think for me that's a symptom rather than a cause, which is that we seem to be a country invested in very specific vanity projects. And by vanity, I don't mean useless projects, but projects that make us look like a certain kind of country instead of the country that we are. So we have a giant nuclear project that will provide energy solutions to us and all our neighbours. We have a presidential jet. We have a national carrier. These are all projects that buy into the idea of South Africa as a nation state that works in a particular way, when the statistics and the details on the ground tell of a very different kind of country, where those may not be the priorities we should be focusing on. But beyond that, my sense is also that, as Ray Hartley's pointed out, that there is a combination of the patronage state and the administrative state, to quote Tom Lodge and Peter Alexander from a recent public meeting that they've had about a different political formation, about the Zuma years. It's that we have an administrative state which has to work by the rule of law and for which there are all sorts of checks and balances. And then there is a patronage state in which people are protected and political favour determines access to resources. And we've heard this from the ANC's NGC itself, which is this conflict between democratic governance and, individual interests and the ability to buy certain kinds of sway and influence. And that contestation between a patronage state and an administrative state is a challenge that I think is very difficult for South Africa as a state and a government to come to terms with. Because while the cliche may be that we are exceptional, we are not like other Africans generally, we're actually behaving very much in the 1960s, 1970s post-colonial African stereotype, which is a state like Mobutu Sese Seko's, which spends hugely on, grand projects, but actually on the ground is beginning to fall apart. Here, the difference between us and Mobutu Sese Seko's Zaire of the time is that we have all of these structures in place, which is what precisely we see here. The structures have to be bypassed. And they have to be bypassed by fiat, by individual decision, by a president who then doesn't explain why this happens. Now, this is not a cabinet reshuffle. We've been expecting a cabinet reshuffle. This is taking one card out of the deck. So why this happens now and why it couldn't wait for the entire cabinet reshuffle to be announced signals that there may be slightly more, shall we say, disturbing elements to this particular move. Because if Nhlanhla Nene, as finance minister in this particular political moment and economic crisis, is moved, that will have foreseeable consequences which we will live out over the next week. Whereas if there was a general cabinet reshuffle, you would have cushioned the blow slightly by indicating that this is a change in direction for cabinet as a whole. And I think that this is, once again, lack of foresight, poor planning, bad advice taking, and the ability by people to advise the president to act without taking into cognizance what the consequences will be for the country. Because whether you agree or disagree with the role of the global capitalist economy in its relationship with the South African nation state, the consequences are material, are real, and will be paid by all 54 million plus South Africans over the next couple of months.
Ralph, one of the main issues dealt with in the reaction to this new appointment is the issue of the Chinese deals. I mean, Xi Jinping was celebrated in the country last week. They signed massive deals running into billions of rands. But there was concern about some of the liberties that China might be able to take in the implementation of those deals. Does any of the detail in those particular agreements worry you?
Regarding the Chinese deal, when I travel across the continent, Kenya, Chad, a couple of countries I've been to, you do find the presence of the Chinese. And the worrying concern, and I need to state further beforehand that actually one would say if the terms of those deals were negotiated transparently with nations, following the nation's bureaucracy, it will be better. But there is a worrying concern that I do have about those deals as I observe is that they tend to be focused on individual leaders. They tend to come through individual leaders, but not through the state bureaucracy. And that is a challenge. That is some of the concerns that are being raised with the nuclear deal, the mooted nuclear deal, that it seems to be pushed through somehow underhand. It doesn't go through the normal bureaucracy, where Treasury is involved in doing the due diligence, the risk assessment, and so forth. So the problem with those Chinese deals, they seem to be in that way. If you go to China as an African leader, when you go there, you are not going to push a deal through an individual. You are going to be confronted with the bureaucracy. The same as you go to Washington or UK, you are going to deal with the state bureaucracy there. That would be your finance people there, foreign affairs people there, maybe even the state security or intelligence people. But the manner in which these deals are being worked on here raises questions. There is no transparency about the terms of engagement in those deals, the terms of involvement, whether this 94 billion deal that we are talking about investment, what happens if we default with our currencies performing as it is? Is that loan, the loans going to be converted into equity? What does that say to our sovereignty as well, when people have got equity in our energy and on all strategic areas? So there isn't transparency about that, and we are excited that we are, being saved from the shackles of Western aid, but we are not being forthright in negotiating the terms of inclusion with the Chinese beforehand.
Ralph Mateh, thank you very much for that. Of course, you're watching a panel discussion about President Jacob Zuma's cabinet reshuffle. Stay with us. We go into the last segment of this discussion after the break. Welcome back. We're unpacking President Jacob Zuma's unexpected appointment of the new finance minister this morning. Ray, I'm going to pick up with you. We had a statement from the ANC's Keith Khoza saying the party respects the decision that was made. And yet we've had Masiba Lekota on the program a short while ago saying it's now up to the party to consider very carefully some of the moves being made in government. And that is really where the buck stops, with the party. Can we expect some kind of a stand to be made by the party if indeed it's true that the movement within cabinet becomes whimsical?
Yeah, I think firstly the statement came from a spokesman. And with due respect, we haven't heard from senior party people in the top 6, excluding Zuma. So it'd be interesting to hear what somebody like Gwede Mantashe might say about this. He might give a slightly, I'm guessing, more nuanced response. But the party has always respected the capacity that the president has to appoint and dismiss the cabinet. So they would be taking a big step if they were to start intervening in that. But I also think that Zuma's grip on the party has never been tighter. He's not a lame duck president. He has a lot of political clout within the party, and he runs the show there.
Are we saying that the party has no say in the appointing of cabinet ministers in some indirect way?
Well, ultimately, no. I think that they have influence and they can make suggestions and they can provide a slate of people. But at the end of the day, the president's prerogative to appoint the cabinet.
Angela, let's look at the sort of policy direction that Nhlanhla Nene set in the last year and a bit, and how we need to go forward as a country. A lot of investors will be looking to the new finance minister for some sort of policy direction. What do we need to hear from him?
Well, there's a difference between what we as citizens need to hear from him and what multinational corporations might want to hear from him. So Nhlanhla Nene's continuation of Pravin Gordhan's position, which was a continuation of the economic macro policy of all post-1994 governments, which was a certain kind of implication in global capitalism. The reorientation of the economic focus from Western aid/economic implication to Chinese/BRICS consulted money was a shift that was supposedly positive. What I think many of the multinational corporations will want to hear is that their interests are protected by this particular finance minister, as it was protected by the last finance minister, because by no means was Nhlanhla Nene not part of the entire process of implicating the South African national economy inside the global capitalist economy and its neoliberal impulses. And for me, again, there's a difference between rhetoric and material reality. And what now will happen is that South African citizens may need to ask questions beyond whether or not their economy is given junk status, whether or not the currency devalues in particular ways, and ask much more material questions about whether the economic planning and economic direction of the country is in their interest before it is in the interest of unaccountable multinational corporations that they cannot vote out. And again, this might be seen as an international trend that is, loosely called the Americanization of politics, which is that multinational corporations actually are much more powerful than national economies and national states. And that cannot be the case in a country that just so recently recovered from fascism. We cannot descend from state fascism into economic fascism. We cannot have unaccountable officials determine what it is that ordinary people on the ground will live like and have to live with as a consequence of their officials, their elected officials, being servants of such capital.
Ralph, I have about a minute left. Can you just sum up for us David van Rooyen coming in seemingly on the back foot, given the public response to his appointment? What does he need to do to prove himself in this portfolio?
Well, he has to demonstrate that he will have a sense of continuity. This is just even a contradiction in terms, because continuity, why did we get rid of the previous person? Two things here: inexplicable firing, inexplicable hiring. There are two separate things. I don't know exactly what would he do, and I don't know whether he will allow this massive expenditure. He will undo the legacy that Nene would have left at National Treasury. And the manner in which the president praised Nene, it also says that there's not going to be attempt to undo everything that he has done, unless otherwise, if you want to do that, you have to declare him a failure and then correct his failures. That has not been done.
Ralph Mateka, thank you so much. Angelo, Fick and Ray Hartley, lovely having all three of you in with us to unpack this discussion. That is where we end this panel discussion. A lot more analysis to follow on the channel throughout the day. Rand Daily Mail editor Ray Hartley, analyst Ralph Mateka and Angelo Fick wrapping up this special panel discussion. Thank you for joining us.